everybody. It's my real pleasure today to welcome you all to BAM 2022. Isn't it fantastic to be here in person? And I cannot say a big enough thank you to Fiona, who was going to host us just before things kicked off in 2020 with the pandemic. But Fiona's going to start by just saying a few words to open our conference. So Fiona Devine, who is the head of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Alliance Manchester Business School, is going to give you a few words.
So thank you very much, Katie, and thank you for that very nice welcome. So on behalf of my colleagues in Alliance Manchester Business School and the University of Manchester, I am really delighted to welcome you all here today for this year's British Academy of Management Conference. Now, over the last 2 years, of course, it has been impossible to meet in person and face-to-face, and this then is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to be getting together and to meeting up with both old and new colleagues and friends in person. Now, of course, some colleagues and friends have not been able to join us from the very extensive global business and management community of which we are all a part. And this is why a decision was made to host a hybrid conference so that there was an opportunity for all of those who couldn't join us to join us online. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of those who are now online and listening in, and thank you very much for joining us. The theme of this year's conference, Reimagining Business and Management as a Force for Good, is a fascinating one. Businesses need to make a profit to pay, at the very least, for their running costs, and of course, most especially paying the people that work for them. But it's also about investing in the future of those organizations and those people. A commitment to doing good, then, must involve, at the very least, thinking about how profits are used in both positive and constructive ways, thinking about the reinvestment in the sustainability of the organization and all of its stakeholders, including employees, customers, shareholders, perhaps the local community, and many more. The drive towards environmental and social responsibility, including the very important commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion, figure prominently in many public discussions. Indeed, I'm sure many of us will agree, if not all of us will agree, that they are key to lasting change. And key to lasting change as well is execution and delivery. Organizations cannot put all of their energies into virtual signaling, but it is really important to effect real and lasting change. Now, business schools have a very significant role to play in this agenda. It requires us to work even closer with businesses and managers, with different organizations, the policy communities, and government. We are, of course, already educating the next generation of leaders and managers who are going to face considerable challenges and have to meet those extraordinary challenges in the years ahead. Through our research and through all of our teaching, many of us have a full range of teaching from undergraduate, of course, right through to executive education. We will need to equip them to cut through complexity, and there's huge complexity in the world in which we live, to make tough decisions, but also to implement, as I was saying earlier, lasting solutions. Being good collaborators will be key to all of this. It's hugely important that we have those collaborations to see change happen. And I think there is plenty of examples of that in our business schools, our schools of management, and how we can be a force for good. So it is a huge pleasure to host you in these facilities at the University of Manchester and also Alliance Manchester Business School. We were most fortunate in the business school to enjoy an £85 million investment in our infrastructure and our services pre-COVID. If you've not had the opportunity as yet to visit the school, please do so, as well as, of course, enjoy the facilities here at University Place. And do make the best of all the opportunities for social activities, for networking that have been built into the schedule. There are so many places to be able to be having conversations, both individually and collectively, with people important to you. So I sincerely hope that BAM 22 will help us to renew all the connections in the community, to restart collaborations, and to spark new ones after such a difficult few years. The global pandemic has been tough on all of us as individuals and as an academic community. But I think we can be proud of everything we've achieved to get here, to be positive and optimistic about the future, and about the contributions that we can all make to the pressing issues of the day and indeed of the future. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Fiona, for being such a fantastic host, and I'd also like to extend special thanks to Ken McPhail, who's the chair of the conference here at Manchester, and he's been fantastic with his committee and working with the BAM office. Ken, if you'd just like to pop up to the stage, we have a very small thank you for you. So my name is Katie Mason, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the British Academy of Management, and it's my real pleasure to welcome you today along with our president Nick Beach, who is on our keynote panel, which will be commencing shortly. Just before we get to that, I wanted to say a few things about what BAM's been doing over the past period, and just to highlight what an amazing turnout we have for this conference. We have over 1,000 delegates here. 75% of them are in person. We had an amazing online day yesterday, and those people come from 50 countries all around the world, so that's absolutely amazing. Our conference keeps growing, getting stronger and stronger, and the number of events has absolutely proliferated. We have over 300 separate events over the conference period, which is absolutely stunning. 650 plus papers. 160 plus doctoral students attended on Tuesday for the most amazing doctoral symposium. So if you've got doctoral students, do encourage them to come and be part of our community. And we welcome many of those doctoral students to their first ever BAM conference as well. So that's fantastic. We've been really busy this year. I'd love to talk to you for the next 3 hours about what we've been doing, but I'm not going to. Instead, you can read it in our annual review, and BAM has an activities table where you can go and talk to members of our core team about what other things go on outside the conference, so that you can really get involved and feel supported by our community. It's such a lovely community that is really inclusive and really helps encourage the quality of scholarship and research and education practice in business and management. So please do find out more. Please do come and talk to us on our activity table. A 3 years ago, we published our strategy, BAM 2024, and it was really interesting for us to try and lay out what our key priorities are. You can download this from the website if you want to see. Really, we've done ever so well in the 2.5 years since. Our equality, diversity and inclusion agenda was first reflected on ourselves, where the British Academy of Management was asking, how do we do EDI? And we added an R to that, respect for each other, for all our colleagues, for everybody in our community. And that has been absolutely amazing. We've learnt a lot, and in fact our council meeting, which kicks off conference every year here, we've identified a new opportunity for us to improve our practices. So this is ongoing, it's never going to stop. We are in pursuit of this as an ongoing journey of improvement. We've also commissioned Research That Matters. We published today our outcome of our EDIR project, which looks at how EDIR is actually working in business and management schools across the UK. We've been working with the Irish Academy, the Italian Academy, who are going to repeat these studies, and that report is available. You can download it from the website. You can talk to people on our BAM activities stand in the foyer there where you get coffee and where the publishers are. So do go and find out more about that. Our relationships with external stakeholders continues to grow, and we're interested in not only working with other learning societies. Some of you might have seen the IFSAM panel, where we're working with learning societies from around the world, but also working with policymakers. We're growing our companions community, which means we're working with practitioners, and we're really working hard to develop those relationships outside academe. So our focus on impact and engagement with practice is ever growing and ever strengthening. Our fellows continue to be ambassadors and have been doing amazing work around engagement. And also we've established a peer review college. So huge thank you to Yehuda for all his work and everybody who's signed up to and become part of that community. I'm not going to talk anymore, except to say, as our new executive came in, we reflected back on where we are with our strategy and had a bit of a strategy refresh, and we've done two things. We're continuing to work on EDIR, equality, diversity, inclusion and respect, and to that we're adding the sustainability agenda, so that we're looking after our planet as well as the people. And we're really going to push our Sustainable Futures agenda as we move forward. And to help us look after that and do that well, we've now appointed a VC Sustainability who will step into role in November. We're super excited about that. And we've been hugely influenced by the theme of this conference at Manchester and Ken's influence on shaping reimagining business as a force for good. So all that is we're delighted to see. Along with the EDIR, we've got an all-welcome guide, which helps us do EDIR in our organisation of events, and we thank Martina for that, which has been amazing. And we've also got an impact book series, so those are some of the impacts that are documents that are coming out that you can use to help hopefully influence and shape your practice. We're also looking to people to contribute to these, so if you have an idea about writing a book that can help us understand impact better as a community, then please do come and talk to us about those ideas. Okay, I want to say a special thank you to a few people. Neil is here. Neil is coming to the end of his term at BAM, and he is a volunteer, as they all are on the executive, and he's been treasurer for 5 years, and he's been absolutely amazing. He's really kept us afloat through the pandemic when many learned societies struggled immensely. And I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to Neil for all that he's done. He's not going away. He's going to be a critical part of our management, knowledge and education community as we move forward. But Neil, please come and accept your... And finally, this person. I can't believe there's anybody in this room that hasn't come across this person. His name's Professor Nick Beach. He has been a driving force behind BAM, the modernisation of BAM over the past 20 years. He was the founding Identity SIG member, and he has done so much for our community, for supporting early career scholars, for rethinking about how we behave as a moral, ethical, caring community that tries to achieve the highest level but takes everybody with us. I can't emphasise enough what an important part of BAM Nick has been. He's not going away, but having gone through the entire ranks of BAM, he's finishing his term as president on the 1st of January. And I just wanted to say a small thank you. I know it's nothing compared with what you do. I can't tell you what he's done. But Nick, just a small thank you from everybody for what you've done. So, he's not getting away, don't worry, he's not going away. Kerry Cooper, who is our founding president and couldn't be with us because he had COVID this week, is still around, so Nick doesn't stand a chance. Okay, so I just want to give a last word over to Vicky, who is going to host us in BAM 2023 in the University of Sussex. So it's over to you for a quick word.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you all for this opportunity. We are excited to host you BAM next year at Sussex. I am Professor Asriki Bamiratzi, and I will be hosting it with Dr. Mariana Mara, a colleague from Sussex. Next year, we are going to continue the vital conversation that we started this year on sustainability. But we'll take, as you can see from the title of the theme, a closer look to the disruptive nature of sustainability, looking at how sustainable disruptive business models and strategies can open new opportunities and avenues for growth and development. So we are more than excited to see you all at our beautiful city in Brighton, a coastal city that has been voted for the last, many years as one of the top destinations, UK destinations for summer holidays and more so. So I don't want to take any more of your time. I just want once again to thank BAM for giving us the opportunity to see you all next year at Sussex, and to invite you to our wonderful campus and city, and continue this important conversation, which are the heart of our strategy and vision as well as a university. So that's all. Thank you very much.
So it's my real pleasure now, without further ado, to hand you over to Anthony Raphael, who's going to be chairing our first plenary session today. Okay, thank you.
So thank you, Kate. So it's a great honour to be chairing this grand opening plenary session today. I think particularly because of the importance of the topic of inclusive scholarship to the broader conference theme of reimagining business as a force for good. Because I guess we could argue it's been the creativity and bravery of our scholarship that such a reimagination can occur, one that links the study of management more to broader societal concerns and the grand challenges of the day. So I'm very much looking forward, and I'm sure as you are, to hearing from our fantastic panel, who will be covering a range of important issues and questions on the topic. These include, what does inclusive scholarship mean for the actual subject matter of management, and looking at that in terms of mainstreaming issues of equality and inclusion in research. What does it mean in terms of our research methodologies and epistemologies, in terms of how we produce knowledge or co-produce knowledge and impact as well? And finally, importantly, there'll be some discussion of what inclusive scholarship actually means for academia in itself, and equality, diversity and inclusion, and the representation of a range and diversity of voices and perspectives within the academic body. So, without further delay, it's a pleasure for me to introduce then our fabulous panel today. So our first speaker will be Professor Quinetta N. Robertson. Quinetta is the John A. Hanna Distinguished Professor of Management and Psychology at Michigan State University, and as many of you will know, a former president of the Academy of Management. Her research focuses on developing organizational capabilities and enhancing effectiveness through the strategic management of people, and in particular, diverse work teams. And her research has been published across many leading journals, including the Academy of Management Journal, Academy of Management Review, and Journal of Applied Psychology, among others. And she currently serves as Deputy Editor of the Academy of Management Journal. So, welcome to Quinetta. Our second speaker then, as many of you know, is Professor Nick Beach, who has already had an introduction today, so I'll keep this one short, as the Vice-Chancellor of Middlesex and President of the Academy. But other activities, as I'm sure many of you know as well, include being the Chair of the UK Standing Committee on Quality Assessment, the Chair of Access HE, and Treasurer and Executive Member of both the Academy of Social Sciences and the University Alliance. His academic background is in business and management, and his research focuses on identity, diversity, change, leadership, and learning. Finally then, bringing in an important practitioner perspective and closer to home from Manchester here, we have Banji Adewumi, who is the Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Manchester. Banji has extensive experience in the topic of EDI. Prior to joining Manchester in the EDI Directorate, she worked at Barts Health NHS Trust, where she was Associate Director for Inclusion. She led the diversity and inclusion agenda across 5 hospitals, which had more than 16,000 staff, located in one of the most diverse areas of the country. So, without further ado, I'll pass over. We'll take our presentations in row. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I must remind you as well, welcoming our online audience and people in the room, we do have the conference app and so forth, the platform where you can post questions as they come to your mind or within the question and answer session afterwards. So without further ado, I'll pass over to our first speaker, Quinetta. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to first say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here on this panel and speak with my esteemed colleagues, join with my esteemed colleagues to talk about inclusive scholarship as a force for good. And it's interesting because most of my research is in the area of inclusive leadership. So I thought this is easy. I can just take what I learned in my research and apply it to scholarship. Right? And if I think about some of those things, I recently did a workshop at Harvard and they put together this wonderful graphic, which is a lot going on, I recognize. But I want to pull out a couple of things. What it summarizes is some inclusive leadership work done by one of my former doctoral students, now a colleague Jamie Perry at Syracuse University, where we asked leaders what they do to be inclusive. And we found a couple of things that I find could be relevant to our scholarship if we're thinking about inclusive scholarship. For example, understanding diversity of thought, incorporating diversity of thought into our work, or having, collaborating, having an interdisciplinary perspective and incorporating that into the work. One of the things leaders also talked about was skill utilization and being able to utilize different skills and approaches in order to get work done, which I think is very relevant to the work that we do and therefore could be applied, and we can say that's what inclusive scholarship is. But instead of doing that application, I decided to take this opportunity to challenge myself and take a more epistemological approach, as Anthony mentioned, to think about not what's in our model, but what's missing from our model. What don't we know? And one of the things that I found interesting that I'll pull out, another thing I'll pull out of the results that from the leaders' responses is when we talked to them, when we said, what do you do to create inclusive work environments? They said that they allow different things. For example, I allow my employees to make a contribution. I allow my employees to have voice. I allow my employees to be themselves. Now, I don't know if that sounds weird to you, but to me, I'm wondering, how can you allow me to be myself, right? And so what we heard in there was a bit of a power dynamic, right? That there has to be an invitation or an opening for someone to be able to make a contribution. And that made us think about truly what could be missing from our scholarship. In a more recent paper that is recently published in the Journal of Management with one of my doctoral students, we examined this idea of contribution, and particularly as a barrier to inclusion, right? When do people not feel a sense of belonging, not feel a sense of uniqueness? When can they not contribute? And we put forth a new dimension of organizational justice, which we term contributive justice. And contributive justice says in order for people to be able to make a meaningful contribution to organizations or to work, they have to have instrumental voice, meaning not just asking them what they think and then a manager goes and does whatever they want to do anyway, but more so using what they say and using their perspective, and also having them engaged in meaningful work. As I think about this concept of contributive justice, I think it can also inform our approach to inclusive scholarship. That many times we put values or valence on certain topics, certain approaches to research, but if we are truly being inclusive, we need to value all of those different approaches and all of those different perspectives on inclusion. When I was program chair for the Academy of Management Conference in 2019 in Boston, my conference theme was on understanding inclusive organization. But I didn't want to just hear from the diversity scholars, or I just didn't want to hear from the leadership scholars, or the OB scholars, or the HR scholars. I wanted to hear from others. I wanted to hear from those in supply management. I wanted to hear from those in critical management studies. I wanted to hear from those in healthcare, because that's where the magic happens. And so if we're really being inclusive, I think we have to value those different perspectives and different approaches in order to advance our scholarship. Another thing that we found in our research, and I realize that I'm going through this fairly quickly, but I want to leave time for Q&A, is that when we asked the leaders what they did to create inclusive environments, they told us some very wonderful things. But it made us think, is this what you really do, or is this what you think you do? Right? There seemed to be a bit of a self-presentation bias, because when we asked employees what leaders did to be inclusive, we found somewhat different answers. And so there's an inclusion challenge of, as we think about what leaders do, is that really what they're putting into practice? And so the colleague that I mentioned, Jamie Perry, she and I are doing currently working on a qualitative study, and I thought this was a good opportunity to share some of our preliminary findings, which we asked leaders in the hospitality industry about how they think about inclusive leadership, as well as what they do to be inclusive, which is very interesting, because what we found was that how they think about it actually influences what they do. And in particular, while we did find that their actions were informed by how they conceptualized inclusion and also their prior experiences with inclusion, what was really fascinating was what they thought the value of inclusion was. What was the outcome? And so you had some leaders who thought about the success of their employees, the well-being of their employees, and that for them was what inclusion was all about. And so all of their approaches were about making employees the best that they could be, to bring out the best and to achieve career success. But then for some leaders, their approach was that it's about the bottom line. It's about performance of the organization, which our preliminary findings suggest produces a completely different approach to inclusion because they're more focused on the organization or that performance motive. And so I wonder if we reflect on what we don't know, is that driving what we have as our findings in the inclusion literature? Because as researchers, what we do is we ask respondents to respond to some questions or a scale that come from our perspective, right? Now, of course, it's evidence-based, but it's our perspective. So the question is, are we truly incorporating or valuing the employee experience in our scholarship? Are we capturing what they actually experience in organizations? The other thing is that a lot, at least in the US, when people talk about inclusion, they often say DEI or EDI or some form of those letters, but they talk about equity, diversity, inclusion as if they are one thing, right? There's this one kind of conglomerate of concepts that make up a thing. But in doing so, the outcome on which people focus is that for performance or for the bottom line, financial outcomes, et cetera. But if we focus on that, I wonder if that is what's informing our behaviors. But instead, what if we think about the social good? What if we think about sustainability? What if we think about other outcomes? Will that actually change our behaviors? Does that change what being inclusive means? And so if we're pushing ourselves to truly be inclusive, engage in inclusive scholarships, we need to consider those things, that how we might be framing the context of the problem may drive the actual outcomes. So my proposition here today is that we can draw from the inclusive leadership literature in order to inform inclusive scholarship. But what I think we should do is to look at what's not in the inclusive leadership literature, what's excluded to actually inform inclusive scholarship. As a scholar on inclusion, I can say that I know about the phenomenon of inclusion. But as an inclusive scholar, I can say I don't know everything about the phenomenon, but I'm interested in learning and I'm committed to learning more. And those are the conversations I want to have. Those are the conversations I look towards having with all of you. And thank you.
Thank you, Quinetta. That was absolutely lovely. I will say something at the end about the presentation and what you did earlier, which would move me immensely. But before I do that, as Katie was saying, this in a way is my swan song. So I thought it might be appropriate to drag it out for as long as possible. And no, not really. As Katie was saying, one of the things that we've really been focusing on over the last 10 years in this community is the idea of inclusivity. And it really follows on, and Quinetta's work has been played a really starring role for all of us, I think, in reshaping not just our thinking, but our action. And for us as a scholarly community, I think part of the judgment that we should apply to ourselves and others apply to us is how far do we enact our values, how far do we enact our knowledge, and what influence does that have on us as human beings? So what I'd actually like to do is say a word about being inclusive and what that might mean for us, a word about value and perhaps broadening the idea of value and what we value and how we evaluate, and then just leave you with a thought about perhaps a slightly more rounded, holistic view on what and how we value each other and things. And so in terms of inclusivity, Quinetta has talked about a shift in terms of culture, cultures of leadership, cultures of belonging, cultures that include performance but aren't limited to that. And for us, and I think for many in the BAM community, a crucial thing about inclusivity is not about people conforming to, in the sociological term, the dominant culture. So it isn't about saying, there's the shape of an academic, there's a shape of a practitioner, or there's a shape of a policymaker. And the more that we can just get people to fit that shape, the easier it is for all of our systems to work, and then we can make things troll along pretty helpfully. Well, the trouble with all of that is, of course, that even if it's true, it just means that your systems are trolling along fairly consistently and keep on doing the same thing. And actually, what we need is a shift in the culture that means the culture itself is changed by the nature of inclusivity. And for me, having spent many years studying identity, which is in one sense the things about yourself that remain the same over time, that remain the same in different contexts, the crucial thing of that is what changes, what moves, what alters, what are the dynamics. And at the heart of that, I think, is learning. And learning specifically because it is about us individually and as groups moving into the unknown and having the bravery to do that and having the self-challenge to do that and having the other challenge to do it, and also in taking an inquiring approach to our scholarship and our research. And that, I think, means that one of the things that we need to do is get beyond meager identities. And what I mean by meager identities are the ways that we are able to label others and typically label them to fit in with our narratives, our sense-making, the sorts of things that we want to do. So over the years, I've had the joy of working in the music industry quite a lot. And it's quite easy to find forms of identity projection in which you're trying to organize a concert and the awkward musicians are now talking to each other and they've practiced slightly too long, and actually the result of that practicing slightly too long is because they're all in the union, we now have to pay 4 times the amount that we thought we were going to have to for the rehearsal time because we've slipped over just by 10 minutes into a different hour. Those sorts of stories that just get stuck around the walls become invisible but become part of our structures. Now, of course, that becomes a challenge to us as management and business scholars who are trying to shift some of the identity categories to say, actually, those are human beings, and they bring with them all sorts of aspects that we need to build into the way that we ourselves then change, which I think relates very strongly to both Quinetta and what we're going to hear later. So firstly, rejecting the stereotypes, but doing so in a thoughtful way. Second thing I wanted to say about that is it doesn't mean that we need to be the same as each other. And there is, in a sense, a paradox in which we need to both be a community, but be a community in which we are quite deliberately and overtly different from each other. And this is why I think learning is so important. So we often talk about transformational learning as part of our scholarship. Many universities have that as a phrase. But if we look at the research behind that, so particularly Illyris or Engerstrom, one of the things that they are arguing is for a dialogical approach, and a dialogue not in which I go into a situation with somebody else and I'm really trying to convince them that I'm right. What I'm actually doing is going in a self-questioning way to say, how do I become changed as a result of that engagement? And so one of the ways of thinking about that is we are together producing resources, social resources, that enable me to be changed by that engagement, that mean when I go into my next encounter, I enter it in a slightly different way. And so that means that I need to be constantly learning, and that means actually I need to be humble, and I need to be vulnerable, and I need to be wrong about things. So Quinetta, I think you're absolutely right. Most of the time, I'm likely to be wrong, because we're all the time moving out into the unknown. We're trying to learn new things and research new things. And that is, of course, a bit of a challenge for many ways of thinking about business and management, where certainty is privileged, and leadership becomes personified in a meager identity of somebody who's right or who directs or all of those sorts of things. So I think this is actually not just a small challenge, it is a major challenge for the way that we operate. But I think there's a really great secret, which is, in one sense, I know this is not news really probably to any of you. In other words, lots of us kind of do this and know it, but we need to give ourselves permission to remove the bushels and show it to each other and to actually then build on it. So I'm not banging on too long. I'm just going to give you one really quick example, which is from some great people at Middlesex where I work. And they did, so this was a team that involved people from design, from engineering, and from business. And they were looking at an area of great poverty in Africa where there was really problematic areas of environment, one of the points that Quinetta was making, exclusion, and socioeconomic deprivation. And one of the things they did was to work with people in that situation to say, how can we shift with you the use of fuel? So they did a lot of charcoal burning, which is pretty bad for the environment, pretty expensive, and actually meant that people were getting into debt around that. And they moved from that idea to co-producing fuel briquettes from waste that included material waste and other things that were just around. And they moved on from that into setting up small businesses to produce these briquettes, providing them across the area, but also then selling them into other parts of that society. And quite a lot of those small companies that got set up were actually run by the women in that group, which meant that actually they started to have a slightly different voice when it came to the social fabric of what was going on. Now, when you look at that, just as a micro story, there's lots of complexity behind it. One of the things that's really interesting is none of them had quite predicted what the value was going to be in the direct project, but there is value in the project. The idea was, how do we help social change? And it actually became socio-economic change that also had a diversity angle to it. So in terms of what we value, there are some immediate values, some of which are planned, and I think we ought to measure, but some of which are emergent, and we ought to sense and be able to capture some of those, often in narrative form. Beyond that, actually, there was a level of social change that impacted on what the government was doing and a policy level impact, because here was a concrete story, a briquette story that people could build on, literally. But also in the way that the researchers and the scholars were working, they became changed themselves. So they had to adapt their methods, they had to shift out of their comfort zones, and they had to work across their traditional boundaries. Now, I've gone on too long, so I will stop. But I just want to suggest that there are ways, therefore, of thinking about not just the immediate value, but how do these things progress over time? How do we have relationships between each other that stop us being in meager identities in which we just have to classify others, and start us thinking about the ripples that move out, both socially in terms of return on investment, economically, but also in terms of inclusivity being at the heart of what we do. And I'm going to skip that because I've gone on too long and leave you just briefly with an advert, which is, if you were ever tempted to read any of this stuff, there's bits of it coming out in various publications. So at that point, I just wanted to say a word of thanks to you for what you did earlier. I was actually so moved. I'm going to cry. I was trying not to cry because I thought, that's not really the sort of thing you're meant to do, is it, as BAM president? So my mascara is still in place, I hope. But I was so, so moved, and thank you. You are my family, and I love you.
Thank you, Nick, for that presentation, and also acknowledging the fact that I'm here. Yes, an employee of this organization. It's a privilege and an honor to be in the midst of distinguished scholars and, of course, distinguished panelists. Good morning. Am I right? Yes. I will start by saying thank you once again for the invitation. The topic being inclusive scholarship as a force for good. And one who has worked across 3 sectors, yes, 3 sectors, so currently in HE, have worked in the NHS, and I've also worked in the local authority, not counting years when I was in civil service, but not in a dedicated EDI role. What more do we need to hear? What more do we need to see? What more do we need to read for us to know that inclusion is everyone's responsibility? And I've consciously chosen the 2 pictures because I'm sure it does bring a lot of memory, probably harder for some than others, be it in regards to the pandemic, and indeed, I would say the global phenomena that following the death of George Floyd. And much as it was and still is a reality to some, without question, looking at the aspect of, and Banji's going to be going back and forth, inclusive scholarship as a force for good. By whose standards is my question? By whose standards? And I consciously brought this book along. I picked it up yesterday, and there is an article there by Tara Alice of McKinsey. And similar question she's also asking. What do you mean by good? What do we mean by good? I know I'm speaking to scholars, people in management, and of course we do have a lot of resource that we're responsible for. And when I say resource, not necessarily just focusing on money, but the human resource, the human capital that's available to us. And in some cases, not necessarily the choice of the individuals in our care. Why do I say that? Because I do recognize by virtue of my job that there's certain individuals who are there for the sake of having to pay the bill. I'll park that to one side. I've been asked one or two questions that need be addressed in this session. And one of it is, how has my experience of the university compared with my time in the NHS? And I have two words to explain that. One is interesting, and two, similar. I'll start with the second. Similar, because sadly, certain issues remain the same. And if I'm dramatic, that's my way of expressing myself. And my colleague said something earlier about co-producing knowledge. And I do know the power of the visual and artful knowing. So why do I say similar? In the NHS, sadly, underrepresentation of people like me by virtue of my color in senior positions. Sadly, individuals who have a disability not necessarily sharing that information with HR, or what we now know as the People Directorate. And unfortunately for some, the pandemic has exposed the fact that they do have a health condition. Why? Because they were shielding. And they had to return and, of course, talk to an individual who originally they hadn't primarily shared that information with them. Or indeed, individuals, by virtue of their sexual orientation, some information may be visible or not visible, and they're on the front line, and their experience has been less than good. So to the question, what do we mean by good? I said two words describe, one similar. The second is interesting, and to explain, I have a picture. Remember, artful knowing, co-creating knowledge. That picture, that's my left. I have to do this to know which is left and right. That's my left. Was actually taken whilst on a flight to Nigeria, acknowledging those who are from Nigeria. That's my bias I'm expressing. And to my point about interesting, is my truth your truth? I'll put that to you as an individual. Seeing the world differently. If I sat on the left side of the plane, I look down and I describe what I've seen, that's my reality. You're on the right side, or the other side. You look down, what you see is your reality. As a practitioner, over the years, and as my coach would say, I come across situations whereby, oh, I can't lift this, can I? I'm quite... I like to illustrate. So this is imagine this being a telescope. So I'm at one end of the telescope, and the other party is at the other end of the telescope. And what I've found has been interesting, similar to being in the NHS, is just as you would have certain individuals in a world of theirs, not necessarily recognizing the experience of others in another world. And my invitation to you is literally looking through the telescope from the end of the other party. And for you and I'm sure you know which other party or parties you need to engage with in this journey of inclusive practice. What is our data telling us? I've chosen to put this up, and apologies if I'm speaking to an audience that already knows what I'm about to say. It saddens me that representation of professorship as at 2021 is as it is. And hence my invitation for us to see things differently. I remain hopeful, and I'll tell you why as I'm about to read a poem. But before that, as an EDI practitioner, when I put out the question, how are we doing with regards to EDI? Some might say, oh, we're doing a lot. And in fact, with regards to gender, we've done so well. And Athena Swan has enabled us to do that. For those who might not know, it's a charter mark that's used in higher education. And then in me, I go, that's it. I don't do that to them, but that's happening in my head. So what if there wasn't a charter? What would you do? You've just told me we've made improvement with gender because of the charter mark. And then I say, so if there wasn't Athena Swan, if there wasn't the Race Equality Charter, if there wasn't Disability Confident, or benchmarking platforms provided by Stonewall, or Business in the Community, the Business Disability Forum, and there are many others, what would you be doing? What I haven't told you, and wasn't read in the script, mindful of the time, is that I studied chemistry. And some may wonder, what? My hope remains that we'll move from that, where diversity is caged, to where it flourished, and to Nick and Quinetta's point, learning through experience with the aim of achieving a new understanding of each other. I'll take a moment to read this poem as my own demonstration of diversity in the creation of knowledge. Door knocking. I know what the sound of knocking a door sounds like. I have knocked on doors over the years, and there's something about that sound. I can also identify other door knockers. There's something about the look on the face of a door knocker. Oh, the art of knocking doors. It's music to my ears. Why won't doors be opened once there is a knock? Why does there have to be a delay? Open up, you doors, open up, I say. There are different doors that people knock. There are different doors that are being locked. What are those doors? I hear someone say. There are different doors depending on the time of the day. In the morning, it's the door of education. In the afternoon, employment and accommodation. And the evening, it's health, wealth, and well-being. Oh, the art of knocking doors. It's music to my ears. Why won't doors be opened once there is a knock? Why does there have to be a delay? Open up, oh you doors, open up, I say. There is a rhythm and there is a beat. I can hear the knocking on the doors. Many a knock, regardless of the time of the day. Oh, the art of knocking doors. It's music to my ears. There seems to be a slowing down of the beat. What could that be? Is it that the door knockers are tired because they've been knocking for so long and have run out of steam? Or could it be that doors are open? Only the door knockers could tell, and maybe those at the door could tell. Who is at the door, I hear you say. And so to the topic of inclusive scholarship as a force for good. You will decide, because I believe each and every one of us, we're at the door and able to open the door and make scholarship inclusive. Thank you.
Great, so thank you very much to all our panelists today for, I'm sure what you agree was a very kind of thought-provoking, if not inspiring, set of presentations. Now it's time for questions. I shall kind of relieve myself of my kind of chair's privilege because we're slightly running behind time and go straight to the audience. And just a note as well, we do have the kind of the app and the online platform if you want to post your questions on there as well. So we do have some questions coming through on the app, but we can also take from the floor as well. I mean, while we're waiting for those to come through, I think I will actually abuse that position and say, through the presentations, there was some discussion of voice. And obviously, voice in terms of contributive justice in the workplace. How can we improve voice in the scholarship, I guess, is one of the questions I would have there. The question we've got online so far is more to do with methodologies. So essentially, Patience is suggesting that BAM seems to do well a lot on kind of more qualitative studies. We're back to this voice issue, perhaps, and not as well on more quantitative research. As a PhD student doing quants, she'd like to be engaged more with some kind of sessions there, but that's more of a broader comment there. So other than that, I've got a couple of questions in terms of methodologies and voice, but we could also take questions here from the floor. Thank you. Yep.
I can't answer both of your questions.
Yeah, it should be on.
It's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I can answer both of those questions about methodology and voice at the same time by giving you an example. That one of my doctoral students, during the pandemic, one of the things he reflected on was that the challenges that the pandemic brought, he found himself trying to cope. And in coping, he had, prior to the pandemic, been a very faithful person and felt that during the pandemic he had lost his faith. And so we wanted to examine faith as a coping mechanism. And so he said, okay, let's look for scales on what is faith and coping scales, etc. And I actually thought about it and I said, well, let's think about this differently, right? If people are thinking about faith, what does faith mean? Not religion, but someone's belief in something, right? If I ask you to fill out a survey about faith, of course, on a scale from 1 to 7, on a Likert scale, you can go through the items. But we found that there was a way that we could collect data using audio, where we asked people to tell us about faith. What does faith mean to you? But we recorded their voices and their description. So it was qualitative and getting their literal voice and figurative voice to see if faith meant something to them other than what we thought or what the literature thinks. And what we found was not only were people in the content talking about something unique, but the emotion that came through, the tone, all of these other things that we don't capture in some of our methodologies. And so I think that there's a way to use, I was having a conversation, I went to the Matisse workshop yesterday and had a conversation with a colleague next to me, Vita, who does AI and machine learning, and we were talking about how that can be applied to our respective areas of leadership and diversity. So I think there's a way to be very innovative about the methodologies, whether they're quantitative, qualitative, whatever, but also in allowing the voice and getting into people's true experiences rather than us putting that certain lens on or perspective on people, on others.
Thank you, Quinetta. So we do have another question online. I think Ken perhaps has a question as well. Yeah?
Thanks very much to the panel. That was very, very interesting. So I helped organise this session. I'm fully buy into all of this agenda, but I wanted to ask you two provocative questions. One is how you would translate this aspiration into a very practical context of a business decision. So business facing the challenges of pandemic, and it's going to close if it doesn't do some quite radical stuff. How do you translate this into the real context of decision making? And then a second question is around about an old-fashioned kind of ethical notion of right and wrong. I mean, is that still viable to talk in those terms within the context of inclusivity? Thanks very much.
Okay, and of course, my colleagues would want to add. Just my first response to your question about translating aspiration, especially if a business is faced with, say, a financial challenge. And the first thing that came to my mind was your people. I can definitely tell you there are many individuals who are either in a position or working in an organization with pride, with joy, despite all the other attractions, facing it squarely. I describe myself as a third-generation public servant. I take pride in being a public servant, and despite some, I might be kicking myself now, attractions elsewhere, it's that focus on public services there. And I would want to believe that in most of the businesses that each and every one represents, you would have that in your workforce, and asking them, what can we do in these dire times? I can promise you, you will get answers. The other thing about the ethical right and wrong, I too have that as a question, oopsie, because to the question about good, who's holding the compass is the question I would ask. And that's why, as organizations, be clear about your values, not just saying these are our values, not just writing and spreading them on the website that these are our values, but walking by those values. And inadvertently, they become the compass of good and bad for you. Thank you.
Thanks. Great and testing two questions. Decisions made in a crisis or in a real point of pressure, I think, are expressions of the culture. And they're actually a way that the culture comes to show itself. So I think if at that point you're suddenly asking these questions for the first time, actually what you're saying, our culture doesn't normally do this. It doesn't take into account a different way of thinking. So I think the real answer is start 10 years earlier and be working on your culture all the time, so that when you face a crisis, of course you've got an inclusive and learning orientation to what you try to do. Easier said than done, but I think it is a continuous thing. And in terms of ethics, I argued against meagre identities, and I would argue against meagre categories, ethical categories as well. And part of the reason for that is I think our ethics are displayed in our decisions, our behaviors, the way we relate to each other and indeed to ourselves. So I would see that as being a dynamic that, rather than being owned within a particular part of a culture, actually we ought to be continuously saying, is that moving us in a way that we think is good, we feel is good, we feel is better, or we feel is challenging, and what do we do about that? So I would relate it back to a learning culture at the heart of this.
I would just add to that, economics research shows that if you give people a goal, they will drive to the goal regardless of the process. So if I say, increase the diversity of your workforce by 10%, I can go do that, that's not difficult. But how I go about it is the challenge. And so I think we need to start training people and having more incentives around good process, which goes to what Banji was saying about the enactment of values. We can do that as well. If you ask me to recite values, again, I can do that, but to be able to put them into practice, that is also key. And so in creating that culture that Nick talked about, is that getting people to actually do it behaviorally and create those skills for it rather than just the knowledge about it.
Great. Thanks very much. And I think that point links to one of the questions we've got online from Okali, because there's an interesting kind of balance here between having metrics and in performance targets, but also inclusion not turning into just some form of tick box exercise, and the processes you achieve those targets are important. So Okali is asking, how do we go from seeing inclusivity from just a tick box exercise? Is the question we've got here. So
I'll go quickly. And again, that's another area, because many a times, similar to what Quinetta has said, when there's the ask to increase representation, it's a matter of getting, and I can say it, a black person in the team. And I'm stressing this because I've been told, not at this institution, I must say, oh, you're the token appointment for the Chief Exec's Directorate. I can tell you my response now will be different to a smile. So what am I trying to say we move on from? Representation beyond numbers, but representation in terms of diversity of thinking, and not just hearing it, but acting on it.
Great. Thanks very much. I think we've got time for one more, or two quick questions. I realize we're pushing into the, is that okay? Yeah? So if you can just wait for the microphone, please, as well, so our online audience can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Naomi Chambers from Alliance Manchester Business School. Thank you very much for fantastically stimulating presentations. My question follows on from what Ken has just asked, which is about practical things that we can all do in relation to promoting inclusive scholarship. And it occurs to me, and I'd be interested in your comments on this, to what extent you think it's helpful to always have at the front of your mind how inclusive is the way in which we're teaching, what is on the curriculum, how we're promoting, if you like, EDIR as a golden thread through what we teach, and also how we research and what we publish. And I'm going to be publishing next year a research handbook on leadership in healthcare, and I'm really actively trying to decolonize the narrative, and therefore have commissioned about 6 chapters from a non-Western point of view. Thank you.
Should we collect both questions, perhaps for reasons of time, and because we've got to get the microphone up to the back? Perhaps actually we can answer this one while the microphone's traveling. It's the gentleman at the back here. So
while the microphone's traveling, I just want to say that I think you answered the question because you gave all of these wonderful ways of going about, you know, making sure that you're being inclusive. One of the things we find, I think, is that a lot of people, whether that's leaders or scholars, they say, I'm inclusive, right? Which is like saying I'm humble, right? If you say it, you're not. So it's the, what's the enactment of it and kind of challenging yourself. And so you talking about the decolonization and thinking about all these different ways of getting at that. I think another way is valuing the different ways that knowledge is disseminated, right? And so it's not just in a particular set of journals. It's not in a particular, course, or it's not located in a particular geographic region. And I think there takes a certain level of courage to be able to challenge our own thinking, to say, here's what I think, but how can I be more inclusive? And that's the practice in getting people to challenge themselves. But I appreciate your suggestions.
Can I just quickly piggyback on that? So I would see it as being a way of life, not something that you just occasionally do when we're thinking about curriculum or indeed anything else. I suspect for you it probably is a way of life. And if it is a way of life and we're focused on learning, then we start out with questions, not statements, like I am inclusive. We start out with questions of how am I doing and how might we do differently, and sometimes how might we do better. And that, I think, just feeding through your normal way of interacting helps produce a different culture.
Great, thanks. I think for reasons of time, we're kind of moving on. If it's an extremely quick question,
Extremely quick.
Yeah, great.
And thanks for a great start to the conference. I'm Greg Bamber from Monash University in Australia. My question is for any reflections on the notion of positive discrimination. We've had discussions in Australia about reserving positions for Aboriginal or Indigenous people, sometimes also reserving positions only for women. So positive discrimination. Any views? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
That's a quick question requires a long answer, I'm sure, but if there's any quick reflections before.
Yeah, I'll go quickly, and colleagues may add to it. Positive discrimination is illegal for us in the United Kingdom. The equivalent we have is positive action, and I invite you to please look into that. So we wouldn't necessarily say we're reserving a place for, but of course encouraging applications from the area that you've identified. And should you have equally qualified and, what's the other word that escapes me now, candidates presenting, the choice would be for the individual from the group that's underrepresented. The other thing I want to add is being mindful for this applies to all organizations, not just in Australia. Be mindful of the narrative, which in essence is depicting a picture of members of a community that do not have skills to be able to fill the position, because that in itself is like a master narrative, as Dillard would say, that in itself is already playing into the individual who hopefully is coming in to bring their best to the organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll leave that one there. I think it's a really important point when with students as well. There's some misunderstandings there around the kind of the equality legislation and so forth, and the issues you raised there about the skills in the workforce. So thanks very much then. If you could just join me in welcoming, congratulating our panel. There's some nice little treats coming. That's always good to see. Thank you. Yeah. And I'll pass back to Kate. Thank you.
And a special thank you to Anthony Rafferty there for chairing so beautifully when we've got so many questions to ask. And I hope these conversations continue beyond this session. So it's really important that we recognise the contributions of people in this room to our community, and that's what we're going to turn to next. It'd be really nice if people stayed and listened to the contributions that people have made so we can celebrate those that help us so much in achieving the difficult things that we achieve. So if you'd like to be seated, that would be really great. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over now to Professor Fiona Wilson, who is our Deputy Dean of Fellows, and she's going to present and welcome our new fellows into the Academy. So over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Katie. So we award Fellowship of the British Academy of Management to recognise academics who have a strong international profile of high-quality research and who have made a significant contribution to the well-being of BAM following a process of nomination, scrutiny and election by the college. Fellowship is not just a recognition of excellence, it's an invitation to contribute further to the work of BAM by promoting the highest calibre of UK research in management and business on a global stage, progressing research-led teaching and ensuring the highest standards in all areas of management education.
Thank you, Fiona. So I'm now going to read out names of our new fellows, and they will come onto the stage and collect their award. Okay, so very first we have our very own Emma Bell. So, Emma is a Professor of Organisation and Leadership at the Open University, and she's been BAM Co-Vice Chair for Research and Publications, and she's made a really important part both to scholarship and to our community. So lovely to see you, Emma. Thank you very much. Next, I welcome Professor Dermot Breslin, who is Professor of Organisational Behaviour at Rennes Business School and co-editor of one of our journals, the International Journal of Management Review. He's just finishing his term as Editor-in-Chief and again make a fantastic contribution to our community. So thank you. Patricia Lewis, who is a Professor of Management at Kent Business School. Unfortunately, she can't be with us today, but I hope you're online, and very many congratulations, Patricia. And again, one of our own executive, Professor Savas Papagiannadis, forgive me, Savas, but it is... the David Goldman Professor of Innovation and Enterprise at Newcastle Business School, and he is on our current executive as Co-Vice Chair for SIGS. Next, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Martine Slivois, and she is a Professor of Business Ethics and Organisation Studies at Durham Business School, and she's also our BAM Vice Chair for Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Respect. We welcome Pally Smart, who is a Professor in Operations Management, Head of the Management School at the University of Bristol, and a member of our BAM Council. we welcome Carol Woodhams, who is Professor of Human Resource Management at the University of Surrey. And a very warm welcome to our final new fellow, Professor Douglas Cummings, who is from Florida Atlantic University. He's been a really important co-editor of one of our journals, the British Journal of Management. He's sadly not able to be with us today, but we heartily and warmly welcome Doug into our community. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over now to Nick, who's going to present the companionships.
Thanks, Katie and Fiona. So a companionship of the British Academy of Management is made by invitation, and it's to recognise outstanding contributions in the field of management, in the contribution of management and business in society, to policy and to higher education more generally. And our community deliberately seeks to honour those who have provided real leadership, and leadership that fits in and supports the values that we are trying to extend. And I think that is notably true of the awards that we'll be making today. We have 8 new companionships that we're awarding. Several of them are not able to be here, although in fact many of those have participated virtually through the conference. The first award is to Gordon Marston. Gordon is made a Companion of BAM in recognition of his support for widening access to education, one of the British Academy of Management's core values. Gordon has taken a long-standing interest in improving the life chances of young people. He's a politician, he's a historian, a writer, a commentator. He was MP for Blackpool South from 1997 to 2019, and prior to that was an Open University lecturer and tutor for many years. He has served in government in the 2000s and 2000s as parliamentary private secretary in the Lord Chancellor's office, in DCMS, and in communities and local government. And he also served in the select committees on education, employment, innovation, university skills, and chaired the all-party skills group. He is a trustee of the National Social Mobility Charity Villiers Park Education Trust, helping support students from less advantaged backgrounds through mentoring programs, get into higher education, technical skills, and other pathways. On the opposition front bench for 9 years, Gordon held portfolios which included the world of education, skills, and apprenticeships, and he was Shadow Minister for Higher and Further Education and Skills from 2015 to 2019. And he, during that time, set up and coordinated the Independent Lifelong Learning Commission, which has then led on to lots of other activities, not least the Right to Learn campaign, of which he is still a very active leading member. Just on a personal note, I have to say I've been deeply impressed, not just by Gordon's work in all of these areas, but by the spirit in which he's undertaken it, the way that he has actually lived out those values and many of the things that we've been talking about today. So he's not just a thought leader, he is really a leader in his own actions. So it's with many congratulations that we invite Gordon to the stage to receive his award. Can I just shake your hand as you go? Thank you, well done. Thank you, Gordon. The next award is for Nick Hillman. Nick Hillman is director of HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, and he has made a BAM Companion in recognition of his support and really his innovative thinking and practice for higher education as a whole. Prior to being director of HEPI, Nick worked for the Right Honourable David Willits MP, who's not an MP at the moment, but is also a BAM Companion and was made a companion a couple of years ago. He was Minister for Universities and Science, Chief of Staff, and then Special Advisor in the Department for Business Innovation and Skills. And beyond that political work, Nick has written in a range of areas for think tanks and journals and has produced pieces both on things like the Coalition's higher education reforms, access to schools and universities in the Higher Education Review, and on the history of student loans in areas such as a contemporary British history. And in fact, I think Nick was a history teacher prior to his policy work. And he's also been written very authoritative pieces on being a special advisor and the influence on government and how we might think differently about policy. Recent work with HEPI, for those of you who follow it, has really been of an outstanding quality. So work on Brexit and its impacts, work on pensions, and work on the broader policy environment and its impacts on universities, on academics, and students. And he's also been particularly thoughtful about students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. In 2020, he was shortlisted for the first Prospect Magazine Think Tanker of the Year award. He is an honorary fellow of both Queen Mary University and the National Conference of University Professors. I've been hugely influenced, I have to say, by Nick's work. And as somebody that has a background in education, working on policy in education, it's the sort of thing that you imagine might be quite normal, but actually is quite unusual. And so to have somebody taking that real leadership role who's got an understanding of learning at the heart of what they do, I think is quite a wonderful thing and quite a rare thing. So Nick is somebody who has lived out, again, the BAM values and really made a difference in our big policy environment, is clearly worthy of a companionship. So Nick, please come up to the stage to receive it.
Thanks so much, the Secretary.
Thank you, Nick. I'm now going to just go slightly more briefly through a number of other companions who are not here physically, but nonetheless we make their awards today. The first is Amanda Blank, who is CEO of Aviva. She is made a companion of BAM in recognition of her work supporting women in business, reflecting certainly our core values on EDIR and for the leadership she has brought to that sector. The second is Andrew Jack, who is the Global Education Editor at the FT. He has made a companion in recognition of his support for our work for the business community, particularly on mental health and well-being more broadly, and he has been heavily involved in BAM projects in that area over the last 3 or 4 years, and in fact has a really important publication coming out in the next week or so in that field, and is supporting a lot of the work we're trying to do around impact. Diana Beach, who's no relation, is CEO of London Higher and is made a companion of BAM in recognition of her support for higher education in general and in particular for her work with Access HE and the representation or increasing participation of underrepresented groups. She at one time was able to claim that she'd been the special advisor to the last 3 Secretaries of State for Education, but during the summer that moved so quickly that it quickly became out of date. But somebody who's been really at the heart of government and really pushing for many of our points on our agenda. And lastly, she's been hugely supportive of BAM's effort to both research and publish and engage more broadly with the policy arena, both in the UK and internationally. Jürgen Meyer is made a companion in recognition of his work on behalf of the LGBT plus community, and particularly the work there in the workplace and supporting the movement Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And lastly in this section, Mark Leach, who is founder and editor-in-chief of Wonky, which is self-described as the home of higher education policy, bringing the sector together through expert analysis, debate and insight. One of the things that Mark has really led through that process is a broadening of the voice, a broadening of critical reflection, and a broadening of the sorts of challenge of ideas, both in data and in analysis that has brought to bear, but on the policy environment, but has been crucial, I think, for universities. In addition to that, his process has been one of a really quite remarkable entrepreneur who set this up pretty much from nothing and then has produced a really influential group. So Mark is also awarded. The last that I'm going to award today, well, I'm not awarding it today, but we're just recognizing. Oh, right, I've missed one, I'm sorry. Right, so improv without notes. So Rosie Tressler, who is the CEO of Student Minds, is also awarded a companionship. Rosie's work has been absolutely crucial in, we were talking earlier about voice and participation, in giving students voice on a national scale, on highlighting issues of mental health and well-being, but moving beyond an idea of these as being problems that need to be solved occasionally into design ideas into how we think about education much more broadly. And so she's also awarded a companionship. And have I missed anybody else? Right, okay, good. So the last that I'm going to mention is Andrew Hawkins. And so Andrew is actually already formally a companion, but because it happened during COVID, we haven't had the chance to actually congratulate him in person. So Andrew has awarded a companionship. He has formerly been the Senior Director of Local and Regional Government at Microsoft, Europe, Middle East and Africa. He's contributed enormously to BAM projects and really led on long-term projects in which there's a collaboration between academia and business. And we all know how hard those things are to maintain. His work on persevering through some of the rough patches and enabling others to become part of that movement has been absolutely crucial and something that I've seen in action. So Andrew, it's lovely to have you here and please do come and receive the award. Katie, right, so just before I go on to the next award, there's one that's slightly a surprise, I hope, for Katie, who is trying to hide behind me. Something that will never work. So Katie has been chair of BAM over the last few years, and she's now finishing in that role. She is moving on to the president's role, which is really lovely, I think, for all of us, and particularly for me. And during her time, Katie has just been an exemplary leader. We talked earlier about culture change and the way that that needs to be part of normal life and what you do every day. And Katie absolutely lives the values. She has moved us on from thinking about EDI as a key thing and a main project into not eliminating that, but adding to it the thoughts about sustainability, environment, but also the sustainability of communities and how we all grow as part of society in a much more productive way, and the role of business schools in doing that. So I'm really excited about what's going to happen next, but I just wanted us to pause for a moment and say thank you to Katie for her many years as chair. Thank you. Thank you. So the next award we're going to make is the Richard Whip Lifetime Achievement Award. The Richard Whip Lifetime Achievement Award is an annual award in memory of Professor Richard Whip, who is an outstanding scholar in the field of business and management and a former chair of the British Academy of Management. The purpose of the award is to acknowledge the course of a whole career in the field of management, where the recipient has enhanced the field of study, founded or led particular areas, and often had an influence that goes beyond many of the things that we try to measure in careers, particularly in terms of the way that they have helped develop the community. I'm absolutely delighted to present the award to Professor Paul Sparrow of Lancaster University Management School. He is an internationally recognised HR academic who has worked hugely on HR strategy, global resourcing and talent management. He is an emeritus professor of international HRM and really globally renowned for the work that he has done. He started his career in industry and actually has admitted that returning to academia was almost an accident, well, a lucky accident for all of us, after leaving his role in consulting. Before joining Lancaster, he worked as a research fellow at Aston, a senior research fellow at Warwick, where he was a colleague of Richard Webb, and as a principal consultant in PA Consulting and professor at Sheffield University, and then as Ford Chair and Director of Executive Education at Manchester Business School. At Lancaster, Paul was director of the Centre for Performance-Led HR, which brought world-class academics together with top HR directors, a really fantastic example of that form of dialogue and engagement, bringing in people from major corporations and the public sector, and really addressing some of the most pressing issues facing HR specialists at the time. He was also involved in launching the Journal of Organisational Effectiveness, People and Performance, and over the years has been recognised by many other bodies. Notably in 2016, he was the first overseas academic to be awarded the USA Society for HRM, the Michael R. Lucy Award for Lifetime Achievement in HRM Research. He's also regularly been voted amongst the most influential HR thinkers by Human Resource magazine. So now it is our time to be able to recognise Paul. I was saying to him earlier, although his field is HRM, in fact, I think his influence goes far beyond that. And there are many of us in this room that are not HR specialists, but will have read at some point in our careers some of Paul's work that's had the impact that when you read something really special that just alters your direction slightly or gives you a question that you don't know how to answer, those sorts of things I think live with many of us. And the second thing that I think is really important for us to mention is the community development side of things. It's easy, and we've had previous panels here where we've looked at how academics are rewarded or not for impact, and a real drive towards a quite narrow view of academia. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that actually the people that spend time mentoring, not just formally but informally, that care about their peers, that care about the shift that they are part of in the community, is something that is crucial for who we are as a scholarly body and therefore what we produce. Paul has been utterly exemplary in that, and I know that he's touched many of your lives. So Paul, I'd like to welcome you to the stage to make this award.
So we now turn to, we've all got copies of the Peach and they're getting more and more conflated here. It's quite interesting. Okay, so we now turn to our medals. So part of our 30th anniversary celebration a few years ago, we created a set of awards to provide public recognition for the important contributions that our members make. This is really important because a lot of the work that goes on that people are getting these awards for is done voluntarily. It's done in evenings, in weekends. You all know this because you all do it, right? So it's a really important way of getting information back to our deans, back to our institutions, to support us in this work that makes our community what it is. So it's a real pleasure to present the following medals. So our first medal is the Cooper Medal for Outstanding Leadership Contribution, and it's our senior level medal named in honour of our founding president, Professor Kerry Cooper, and we wish him well. It's awarded for exceptional leadership within the community and contribution to the British Academy. It's my real pleasure to award it to Peter McKieran of Strathclyde University. He receives the medal for his leadership of the academic community, for his research, for his head of department leadership, and for being Dean of the BAM Fellows College. And it's through his work on responsible business and management in the broader global community that has really impressed us, and for me, it's very close to my heart. So Peter, wonderful. Please come and accept your... We're also awarding this highest medal to Professor Howard Thomas. He's Emeritus Professor and former Business School Dean of Singapore Management University, Warwick Business School, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. He's also a special advisor on the EFMD. It's a real pleasure to give this to Howard for his amazing leadership of our Fellows College. He's given us all a big kick up the whatnot. He's really made us do our self-reflexive work. This builds on the work of others, but it really is amazing the community that we now have in the BAM Fellows, how active they are. They are our ambassadors. They are the people that do so much support for the doctoral colloquium. They represent us in policy-making settings. They help us develop the careers of our community. So without further ado, welcome to the esteemed list of medalists. Howard, it's a real pleasure to recognise your contribution with this award.
You're going to make me smile, come on.
Robert's watching online.
Nothing worse than playing a wonderful game. Far too long in my life. Thank you very much.
We are also giving this award for somebody who's led a little tiny exercise that a few of you might have heard about or been involved in, called the Research Excellence Framework Exercise, REF 2021. Now, I think he's in recovery, so he's actually online at the moment instead of in person with us today. But Professor Robert Blackburn of the University of Liverpool is awarded the Cooper Medal for his outstanding support for our community whilst serving as chair of Sub-Panel 17, Business and Management. I know many of you here have worked so hard for that effort, but actually the leadership in this field is absolutely crucial. Again, it's creating a compassionate and caring community that supports each other in achieving the highest quality we can. So a huge thank you to Robert. I hope you're listening, Robert, and thank you. We also have 3 people we'd like to present a leadership medal with. This is the BAM Leadership Medal, and somebody who's been a ray of sunshine in our community, who has so much energy, laughter, positive vibes for our community, Dr. Anne-Claire Gillian from the University of West Scotland. Anne-Claire has made a really important contribution to the development of our SIG community, supporting SIG leadership, and I'm sure everybody who's involved in a SIG has come across Anne-Claire. She's been a really important part of our executive, and she's currently leading the mental health strategic project for BAM at the moment, so thank you, Anne-Claire. The BAM Leadership Medal also goes to Maureen Meadows of Coventry University for her role in the transformation of SIGs and the professionalisation of the SIGs. Again, this is an ongoing job with SIGs, but I mean, what an important job. The SIGs are the grassroots of our community. This is where we develop our research ideas and our research capacity. So a huge thank you to Maureen. And finally, in this category, Professor Nicholas O'Regan of Aston University for his strong academic work, his willingness to foster supportive partnerships for BAM and the community, and his ready willingness to act as mentor, especially to PhD students. So, Nicholas, well done. Next, we have medals that are really close to my heart. The medal for knowledge development. And somebody who's been absolutely crucial to developing the management, knowledge and education part of the British Academy of Management is Professor Lisa Anderson of Liverpool University. She gets this medal for her service to BAM MKE, and she has been really working hard to push the frontiers of education practice and to build the community. And the work she's done around building this community, bringing people together that normally are hidden behind university walls, that don't normally have travel budgets, that are helping them achieve pedagogical scholarship, but also supporting innovation in practice as we work out how to engage with practitioners in the classroom and do all sorts of other exciting things. So Lisa, thank you very much. This award also goes to somebody that can't be with us today, but Professor Mark Loon of Northumbria University has absolutely driven the BAM Education Practice Awards scheme. He's been absolutely at the heart of this, the amount of hours that's gone into not just helping people develop their cases, but having the confidence to step forward and then supporting their recognition and development as they go forward has been fantastic. So congratulations to Mark, really good to see this. Next, we have the BAM Medal for Research. This is awarded for sustained original contribution to management research by a BAM member. And this goes to Professor Florian Bauer of Lancaster University for his strong research record, for being a role model for working with practice, bringing that into the classroom and every aspect of his research into mergers and acquisitions, and also to being fundamental in supporting early career researchers. He takes everybody with him in the way that he works. So that's absolutely wonderful. Congratulations to Florian. He can't be with us today, but we're very pleased to see him get this award. And now I'm going to pass over to Kate Black and Ashley Roberts, who are our co-vice chairs for Management Knowledge and Education, and they're going to present the BAM Education Practice Awards.
Yes, thank you, Katie, and hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many of you here and joining us online as well. So nice to be back together, isn't it? So I would like to start off by presenting the BAM Education Practice Awards. This competition was established back in 2016 and is designed to recognise both individual and team initiatives that enhance management learning and education. It's an annual open competition that reflects the value that we truly place on excellence in education practice. It calls for accounts of inspiring and impactful management education that are informed by reflection on context, but also theories of learning plus pedagogical development. We're keen to support the sharing of this excellence amongst our BAM community to create a critical mass of significant and imaginative education. The panel is chaired by a panel of deans. The awards are given out by a panel of deans and supported ably by our MKE subcommittee. Just want to take this moment to say thank you to the deans for their time in assessing the different applications, and also to our MKE subcommittee for all of the work that they invest in that too. So, without further ado, I will hand over to my friend and co-vice chair from MKE within BAM, Professor Kate Black, who will announce the award winners in the two different categories.
Thanks, Ashley, thank you. So the competition has two categories, the experienced and the early career practitioners. We're delighted to announce that the winner of the experienced practitioner category for the British Academy of Management's Management Education Practice Award is Dr. Mike Kennard of the University of Manchester. His project was looking at developing and delivering a new innovation and entrepreneurship unit for the MSc Management Practice Senior Leader Master's Degree Apprenticeship Programme. So if Mike would like to come up and collect his award, please. We'd also like to say that Dr. Rebecca Liu and Sophie James of Lancaster University are highly recommended by the judges for their project on the student self-management system. So, I've got some of you have certificates for them, sorry, I do apologise. And the winner of the early career category for the British Academy of Management's Education Practice Award goes to Dr. Eleni Meletiadou of London Metropolitan University for her project titled Learning Without Digital Business Management in Emerging Technologies with Digital Stories, Translanguaging and Inclusive Collaborative Group Assessment, engaging students as partners in learning and assessment, decolonising the curriculum and promoting creativity and digital learning. And the awards will be, competition will be opening again in 2023, so please do put your entries in. Thank you very much.
So, as you know, BAM has 2 journals which we're extremely proud of. We work very hard to ensure the quality of these journals, IJMR and BJM. And we have 2 retiring co-editors-in-chief. One is Douglas, who you've already heard. Douglas can't be with us today, sadly. The other is Dermot Breslin. They've done amazing service for our journals, and I'd just like to welcome Dermot to the stage to say thank you very much for his contribution. Please, Dermot, do come. Also, during the pandemic, we had another retiring co-editor-in-chief. Retiring seems the wrong word, doesn't it? Because you guys carry on doing heaps of work. Not least mentoring our new editors and associate editors come in, which is really important. But Pawan Budvar, we'd just like to say a special thank you to you to acknowledge your role in BJM as editor-in-chief. It's really important to us, so Pawan.
Certainly retired 2 years ago. Thank you so much.
Well done.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 Best Reviewers Award, 1 for each journal, and we're absolutely delighted to recognise Julio Nardella for IJMR and Rodolfo Sinkovic. We're delighted that they're recognised because reviewing work is such an important part of what we do, and quality reviews makes our journals what they are. Neither of them can be with us today, but we extend our heartfelt thanks to them. I hope they carry on. Well done. That concludes the end of our awards, but I just want to hand over to Nick. We have lost members of our community recently, and Nick's going to remember those important people.
Thank you. So our last point in this process is really to both remember and also celebrate the lives of people who've died in the last year or so. The first that we're going to commemorate is Professor Peter Grigne, and his widow Sylvia is able to join us online today. Peter was a leading light in management research and a very early member of BAM, delivering a keynote at BAM's first conference in Warwick, together with Kerry Cooper, Andrew Pettigrew, Peter McKinnon, Howard Thomas, and a range of other people who have then gone on to be major parts of our community. Peter founded and chaired what is now the University of St Andrews School of Management, and in fact several of us here have come through that process and the great learning that is part of that school. And he also served as university's vice principal and acting principal. He was extremely well known around the world for his work on strategic planning, and perhaps more importantly, is also remembered by many in our community as such a warm-hearted and friendly man who could bring his undoubted and outstanding intellectual abilities and curiosity to inspire all those around him, but also to mentor and support both formally and particularly informally many. So we really miss Peter, but are thankful for his life. The second that I want to mention is Professor Keith Glaister. Keith was a professor of international business at Leeds University Business School and had previously been Associate Dean and Professor of International Business at Warwick Business School, Dean of the Management School at the University of Sheffield, and he'd led major changes wherever he'd been, including in Sheffield, moving it from a school that, when he started, I think, had no accreditations to getting the Triple Crown of 3 international level of accreditations, which is no mean feat, because, of course, that includes a significant culture change. His research interests focused on international joint ventures, on cross-border mergers and acquisitions, offshore R&D, location choice, determinants of outward investment, and behaviour strategy. He was elected as a BAM Fellow in 2011, served on the Dean's Group and BAM Council for many years, and was conference chair in 2017. He's remembered as a highly effective and supportive senior leader who always had time for students, for junior faculty, and for his colleagues. And he has been described by many as truly an academic's academic, and somebody who has had a big impact, I think, for many members of the current exec. He is also greatly missed. So although these are sad things, it is also important that we recognise the huge contribution that they have both made. Katie, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. So folks, nearly lunchtime, but also the real kick-off of the conference. It's so fantastic to celebrate all the awards that we've seen today. Thank you so much to the community members that have stayed here to see that recognitions awarded. Absolutely fantastic. Go conference, have a wonderful time, enjoy your lunch and enjoy this afternoon's session.